On February 2nd, 1959, three young rockers took a midnight flight to avoid a bus ride in the blistering cold. Less than 9 hours after takeoff, their bodies would be found in the field behind me. This is the story of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper, and the day the music died.
Buddy Holly was born September 7, 1936 in Lubbock, Texas. He began playing music from a young age and by age 17 began opening for Elvis during live shows. 2 years later, Holly released a hit single, That'll Be the Day, with his new band known as the Crickets. After several more chart-topping hits such as Peggy Sue and Oh Boy, Holly moved to New York City and the band dissolved. By January 1959, Holly, now 22, married and facing bankruptcy due to stolen funds, decided to tour across the Midwest with two other rock and roll pioneers, Ritchie Valens and J.P. Richardson, more well known as the Big Bopper. Ritchie Valens, 17 at the time, is most well known for being the first mainstream Latino rocker and for his hit singles Donna and La Bamba, an adaptation of an earlier folk song. The Big Bopper, on the other hand, was 28 and was best known for a recent hit single, Chantilly Lace. Together the three, along with their respective bands, began a 24-day, 24-stop tour throughout the Midwest known as the Winter Dance Party. The tour was poorly planned out, with the buses crisscrossing throughout the Midwest, no heat on the buses, and with them often breaking down. Fed up with sleepless nights and a week in dirty clothes, Holly decided to charter a plane to fly from Mason City, Iowa to Minot, North Dakota, with a bag of his band's laundry and 2 extra seats. The first went to J.P. Richardson, as he was fighting a cold and needed to see a doctor, a luxury unavailable on long bus rides. The other seat was intended for Tommy Alsop, then a member of Holly's band. According to Alsop, Ritchie Valens had asked several times about taking his seat before finally making an impromptu bet with Valens, calling it in the air. Valens said that the coin toss was the first thing that he ever won. The three arrived at the Mason City Municipal Airport at approximately 12:40 in the morning, where they met their pilot Roger Peterson, a 21-year-old whose co-workers described as a newly married man who built his life around flying. Less than 15 minutes later they were in the air, but within 5 minutes, all radio and visual contact with the plane was lost. The plane was finally discovered at 9:40 in the morning in a field less than 5 miles away from the airport. It appears that due to increasingly poor weather conditions, Peterson was unable to maintain control of the aircraft and crashed. All died on impact. The news reports were immediate, and according to the coroner's report, there were journalists already on the scene taking interviews, photographs, and video by the time the police arrived. By that afternoon, the New York Times was reporting on the crash. According to several sources, Holly's mother collapsed on the ground when she was notified by a neighbor, and Holly's wife, Maria Elena Holly, suffered a miscarriage the next day due to the stress of finding out that her husband died from television report. Each of the crash victims were buried shortly after, and the Winter Dance Party continued for the rest of the 13 stops across the Midwest. Each of the musicians are remembered as forefathers of the rock and roll genre, and all three had music topping national charts in the months before their death. Each of the musicians are remembered as forefathers of the rock and roll genre, and all three had music topping national charts in the months before their deaths. The Big Bopper is credited with recording the first modern music video, as well as being one of the first radio DJs to begin playing Elvis music. Ritchie Valens is considered one of the pioneers of the Chicano rock movement, bringing the first Spanish-language song to the radio charts, La Bamba, and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001. Likewise, Buddy Holly was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with its opening in 1986. Holly is considered by many to be the most influential individual in the early era of rock and roll, with a note on the massive amount of music he recorded over his short career. Naturally, Holly was a direct influence on musicians such as the Beatles, Elton John, and Bob Dylan, who saw Holly perform at the Winter Dance Party tour. Beyond that, the effect Buddy Holly's death had on the music industry was immense. The period following the Second World War resulted in massive cultural change, and a major group pushing that cultural change were teenagers. Prior to the 1950s, the concept of marketing towards teenagers did not exist. This is due to the many factors. However, one of the most notable being that in the 1950s, young adults did not have disposable income at the same level as they did during the 1950s. Because of this new demographic, coupled with emerging markets in mass media, many music executives were unsure as to what to expect as a result of this tragedy. When what was supposed to be Holly's final album was released after his death, little advertising was done as it was expected to be a complete flop. However, they were surprised by finding that his music continuously topped charts after his death. The music industry even went so far as to re-release earlier recordings of him with his band The Crickets under the new title Buddy Holly and the Crickets, cashing in on the notoriety. This is a practice that is still sometimes conducted today with re-releases, concerts, and memorials of famous artists who had passed away. But the impact of Holly's death extended beyond music. One of the most commonly cited myths was that authorities implemented a policy against announcing victims' names until after families are informed, as family members found out about his death through news reports. While family members did find out about his death through news reports, I have only been able to find a few sources that policies changed due to Holly's death. All of these were written decades after Holly's death, often conflicted with each other, and were unable to provide any source regarding the original decision. In reality, the United States has no standardized system or laws regarding next of kin notification. In reality, the United States has very few, if any, standardized systems or laws for next of kin notification. Most often, organizations have general rules regarding notifications. News organizations often prevent the release of names before families are notified based on ethical grounds. Individual police or emergency departments may also have policies related to the release of names, and larger departments may provide training programs to officers regarding death notification. One of the oldest unified systems within the United States for rapid next of kin notification began in the military and has been considered a priority since at least the Second World War. The current military policy across all branches is to notify family members within 24 hours in person, using 4 personnel between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. in the local time. The State Department follows a similar process for Americans who die overseas. Currently, one of the best free online courses available to organizations looking to implement a death notification program was created by the FBI in cooperation with Penn State University. According to the FBI, the program was created to better equip law enforcement personnel, victim advocates, coroners, medical examiners, chaplains, hospital staff, and others who find themselves delivering death notifications to do so with professionalism, dignity, and compassion. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because the way a death notification is made can have a significant impact on a family's grieving process and on potential future prosecutions. The program consists of 34 sections covering best practices, proper procedures before, during, and after notification, and the proper way to show compassion and respond in that given situation. However, even with the newly available course, the lack of standardization in laws governing death notification still leads to situations where families are shocked by the untimely deaths of family members, such as with the death of Kobe Bryant. His death, along with the death of his daughters and other passengers, were first reported by TMZ before any of the victims' families were notified. While TMZ initially faced backlash for their lack of journalistic ethics, they faced no legal recourse as a result of their early reportings. Instead, lawsuits regarding the lack of family notification have fallen onto the Los Angeles Police Department, as officers ignored department policy of taking photographs on the site using personal devices. Another more recent example is that of Ashley Babbitt during the Capitol riots, where footage of her injuries and death were reported by several news organizations prior to proper identification. It's unlikely that systematic changes to the notification process will happen over the next decade, due in large part to the fact that organizations tend to self-regulate once they reach a certain size or sphere of influence. Further, in the events where notification happens poorly, such as with the examples above, the media focus tends to stay on the traumatic and unexpected death of the individuals rather than how their families were notified. The deaths of Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens marked the end of an era. The death of the 3 young musicians in their prime, being reported on television no less, was devastating for many teens and young adults at the time. It marked the end of a carefree media of the American 1950s to a much more serious media of the 1960s, filled with civil unrest, war, and fear caused both inside and outside the country. Their lives and deaths left a permanent mark on American music culture and has led to myths surrounding them and their lives, which carry on to this day. As always, I'm the Pop Historian. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about anything I've covered, please leave a comment down below or contact me through my email, pop.historian.contact@gmail.com, which you can find down in the description. Until next time.